Now on BBC One, in a change to the schedule, Andrew Neil interviews UKIP leader Paul Nuttall.
In just 10 days, voters will go to the polls in the general election to decide who represent them in Parliament and who will lead the country. So which of the party leaders has the best plan for the future of the United Kingdom? Tonight, I'm joined by the leader of UKIP, Paul Nuttall. Paul Nuttall, UKIP was established in 1993. It was to get the UK out of the European Union. You won the referendum, your side, last year. So instead of enduring this agonising decline in UKIP support, why not just declare victory and go home?
Well, we did win, and as you said, we were set up back in the early 90s to get Britain out of the European Union. With the referendum, I'd say we've won the war. What we've got to do now is win the peace. The Prime Minister will only start the negotiations with the European Union later in June. And look, UKIP has to be on the pitch, because if UKIP's not on the pitch, then there's no real impetus for the Prime Minister not to backslide. And I believe, well, I worry that she may backslide. I think fisheries, or maybe there'll be a deal on the divorce bill, or maybe there'll be a deal on freedom of movement. What we need is to ensure that UKIP is there so we get the Brexit that we voted for on June the 23rd.
But when you launched your manifesto last week, your main focus wasn't on Europe. It was on terrorism and extremism. It almost looked like you're flailing around now, trying to stay relevant, aren't you?
Well, no, not at all. What we've done is we've led on the agenda of Islamic terrorism, and we launched our integration agenda, I think it was about 6 weeks ago. A lot of people within the Westminster bubble felt very uncomfortable about it, but we're saying things what people are thinking, and what we've got to do is we've got to get a grips with this Islamist cancer within our midst. It needs to be cut out, because I worry if it isn't, Andrew, then what happened the other night in Manchester may well become commonplace.
Except critics see that your desperation to try to remain relevant is taking you into some unsavoury waters here. One of your MEPs, Gerard Batten, has called Islam a death cult. Islam. Do you agree?
No, it's language I personally wouldn't use, but what I will say, and I have openly called Islamic fundamentalism, or radical Islam, a cancer within our midst, and I
But
repeat that today.
He didn't use Islamism.
No, I wouldn't.
He said Islam, one
Yes.
of the world's great religions. He called it a death cult.
Again, it's not language that I would use, but I want to make it clear that
Should anybody use it?
Well, no, not particularly. And
your
hang
MEP.
on, let me finish. It's not language that I would use, and the vast majority of Muslims in this country are peaceful. They add to our economy. They love this country. However, there is a small number within that community who hate the way we live, hate who we are, and want to do us harm, and we need to do something about it.
And that's what you would call Islamist, which is different from Islam.
Yes.
But he didn't say Islamist. He also went on to say that Islam is a barbaric religion. Does he speak for UKIP?
No, Gerard's not speaking for UKIP on that. What we say is simply that Islamism and Islamic fundamentalism is a problem. It's not just a problem in this country, it's a problem around the globe.
But he
and we've
didn't
got to
make
come
the
together and
distinction
do something about that.
And this is the candidate that your party's chosen to stand against the Prime Minister. He didn't make that distinction.
No, I think he's got his terminology wrong, and I'll be open and honest about that. What I will say is that we are the only party that put together an integration agenda, which I'm not saying, by the way, is the answer to everything, but it's the beginning of an answer. And what we've got to do is bring communities together to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again.
Is Islam a religion of peace?
The vast majority of Muslims who, absolutely, I mean, they are peaceful. They live in this country, they love this country, they add to the economy. The problem is there's a small number of people who need to be sorted out, cut out of society altogether. And actually what we need to do is we need to ensure that we put more police officers on the beat, and we're proposing 20,000 extra police officers to ensure that these people are caught and brought to justice.
But you want to ban the burqa.
Yes.
How would that cut out, to use your words, this small minority? How would that possibly stop atrocities like the one in Manchester?
Well, there are a number of examples where the burqa has been used in criminality. You had, for example, the killing of the PC, the female PC back in 2005, and the jihadists then escaped this country wearing a niqab. We had the 21/7
But he could have gone in another disguise too, couldn't he?
The failed bombing on 21/7, one of the people who tried to carry out that act of terror escaped wearing a burqa. And only earlier this month, in Manchester, 8 men were sent down for carrying out raids in 2015 and 16 wearing burqas. It's about security. And whether we like it or not, Andrew, we are the most watched people in the world. Okay, there's more CCTV in this country than anywhere else on the planet. And for it to be effective, you need to see people's faces. But that's only the first part. The next part is about integration. And what we need to do is we need to ensure that communities come together. And I would argue that to enjoy the full fruits of British society, you need to be prepared to show your face.
That may be true, but it wouldn't make any difference in the fight against terrorism, would it?
Well, it's a step towards integration. And one of the ways that we will win, one of the ways that we will beat these Islamic fundamentalists is by bringing communities together. And one of the ways you bring communities together is you integrate people into British society. And if you show your face, it allows you to communicate better. It allows you to enter certain spheres of employment, which you're precluded from at this present moment in time. So it's about integration.
It could, though, be seen as a knee-jerk reaction. And let me suggest another one. You now say that where a victim of a grooming gang is of a different race or religion to the offenders, it should be an aggregating factor in a prosecution. But what are you on about here?
Well, it's obviously their race and their religion is a factor. And you only have to look at the 1,400 girls who've been victims in Rotherham. You have to look at the girls who've been victims in Rochdale. I mean, the vast majority of these girls are white, they're Christian, and they've been basically groomed by Pakistani men.
But why does, in the end, the race or the religion matter? I mean, I think we can agree. It's hard to imagine a worse crime than the sexual assault of a child and what happened in the cases you've just given. But why race or religion? Surely whoever does this, they should just be slammed up for a very long time, regardless of race or religion, if found guilty.
Yes, they should, and I would make sentences longer. However, I mean, race is already an aggravating factor when it comes to prosecutions. And I just think in these cases, in terms of grooming, for example, it is quite clear that the race of these young girls has been taken into consideration when these acts have been perpetrated.
Law as it stands is if race was a motivating factor, if you did something bad and race was a motivation,
I think it is a motivating factor.
But you're simply saying if they're of a different religion or race, that should be an aggregating factor, not their motivation, just the very fact that they're not white and not Christian.
But it obviously is a motivating factor because these guys aren't grooming girls from within their own community. These girls are being picked because they're white and because they're Christian.
Except the courts would have to prove that, and that is the law at the moment.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious when there's 1,400 of them in Rotherham.
You've also said that you'd like to see the death penalty returned for terrorists and child killers.
Well, that's my own personal view. That isn't UKIP policy.
You've even said you'd act as the executioner yourself.
I was asked that question by the Mail on Sunday straight out. They said, do you support the death penalty? I said, yes, for people like the killers of Lee Rigby, where it's quite obvious that these were the perpetrators of that crime. They're wandering around with that man's blood all over their hands. And this was a British soldier who was pretty much executed on a British street by a British citizen. As far as I'm concerned, that is treason. And people like Ian Brady, who only died last week, it's cost us 10 million in taxpayers' money to keep that man alive.
And you said you'd be prepared to do the death penalty yourself.
Well,
so do you want to be an MP or an executioner?
Well, I don't want to be Albert Pierpoint. That's not what I'm going to go on to when I'm out of politics. What I will say is that, they asked me that question, and if I'm prepared to stand up and say that I believe in the death penalty, then, maybe I would pull the lever on people like Ian Brady in the past.
So you do want to be an executioner?
I don't want to be an executioner, but I just believe people like Ian Brady, who commit awful crimes against children, I don't see why British taxpayers have to pay so much money to keep someone like that alive.
You recently said you're also okay with waterboarding as an interrogation technique.
No, I used the example of when I was talking about if we were in a situation where there was an immediate terrorist attack on the horizon and we had to get information which would save people's lives in this country, then I would I would use harsh methods.
You would be okay with it?
Well, I would use harsh methods.
Well, you actually said I'd probably be okay with it. These were your words.
Let me just make this point. I would put the lives of British families over the human rights of any jihadi any day.
Including waterboarding?
Including waterboarding.
Is that party policy?
No, it's not party policy, but what I will...
It's your policy.
No, look, as I said, if we were in a situation where there was going to be an immediate attack and people's lives were on the line, I want to see British families protected. And I will put their lives over the human rights of any jihadi.
You know these are almost never the circumstances in which torture is used. That's not what waterboarding has been used for. It's been used to get intelligence and information out of people. Yes. Are you in favour of that?
No, and I didn't say that if you listen to the whole interview.
No, I'm just finding out if you were.
No,
You're not.
No, I'm not. But if you listen to the whole interview, I used the example, if there was an immediate terror threat to a place like this in London, I would always put the lives of British people over the human rights of a jihadi.
Do you agree with another of your MEPs, Roger Helmer? He says that it's, quote, time to think the unthinkable and just lock up suspected terrorists.
Well, look, when you read this morning that there is a suspected 23,000 jihadis who could be living amongst us, obviously MI5 are stretched to capacity at this present moment in time. I think we've got to look at ways of ensuring that our people are safe, whether that is a return to... Hold on, let me finish. Whether that is a return to control orders, whether that is tagging these people, or who knows, in the future, maybe a return to internment. I don't know.
A return to internment?
Well, look, you know, we're in a situation now where we're being told that there are 23,000 possible suspects on our street who want to do us harm. Now, if you consider that it costs roughly £1 million a year to have 24/7 surveillance on these people, we're talking a vast amount of money. Maybe, Andrew, we're just living in a different society now. I'm not saying now is the time to return to this, but I wouldn't rule it out in the future.
Right, so you wouldn't rule out internment, perhaps for thousands of British citizens. You are aware that when internment was introduced in Northern Ireland in 1971, it was the biggest recruiting sergeant for the IRA ever. Yeah, you do know that.
But look, what I'm saying is, in the future, and not now, maybe we can tag these people now, maybe we can return to control orders, but, you know, I wouldn't take anything off the table in the future. Because, as I say, look, unless we get a grip on this, what happened in Manchester the other night, which is part of my constituency, could become commonplace, and that's the last thing we want to see.
Let's just take stock then of what you've told us so far, and what we've discussed. UKIP candidates calling Islam barbaric, banning the burqa, calling for the death penalty, waterboarding in certain circumstances, now internment. In your desperation to be noticed in this election, you're becoming pretty extreme, aren't you?
Well, hang on. The vast majority of those are not UKIP policy, and we're not looking...
They're your views.
Hang on. We're not looking to be noticed. What we're doing is we're leading the agenda in many ways on this. We came out with our integration policy about 6 weeks ago, and the Westminster media, the Westminster bubble, they all felt very uncomfortable about it. So what they did is they mocked us, and they come up with stupid suggestions saying that beekeepers would be banned or bridal wear would be banned. The fact is, we're the only ones who are coming up with an agenda to try and improve integration in this country.
I would suggest to you is beyond the Westminster bubble, that people watching this may feel uncomfortable about the idea of locking up suspects without trial.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Firstly, I'll just quickly move back onto the burqa thing. Polls show time and time again that people agree with me on this
Internment
issue.
Is what I raised, which is much more serious.
It is far more serious, and as I said, we're not at that point yet. But I tell you what, if people were asked if it would save lives, then people would agree with me on that too.
Let's look at immigration. It's a subject very important to UKIP. You propose a one-in, one-out policy. So to let somebody into this country as a migrant, someone else would have to leave. That's just a gimmick, isn't it?
No, I don't think it's a gimmick at all. And no one's talking about putting up the drawbridge here. I mean, the other day, when the immigration figures were released, it showed that 339,000 people left this country, which means that we would roughly allow the same amount of people to come in again. But then, beneath that, there would be an Australian points-based system, like we have pretty much around the world, except for countries within the EU, whereby if you've got the skills that this country needs and there is a gap in our economy, please come here and work.
So the skill system would be on top of the one in, one out. We could still have more than one in and one out then.
No. That's over a 5-year period, so it gives us a lot of wriggle room here. But as I say, we need to get control of immigration in this country. The other day, it was announced that last year alone, a city the size of Hull came to this country. If we carry on this road, if we carry on letting in a city the size of Birmingham every 4 years, we'll end up with a population of 80 million by the middle of this century, which is simply unsustainable.
But just think how this would work. We may, in the years to come, have a desperate need for more doctors, more skilled medical people, or for high-tech specialists. Everybody wants to turn this into a great high-tech country as well.
Yeah.
But we couldn't bring these skills in from overseas unless somebody was prepared to leave the United Kingdom as well.
Well, look, 339,000 people left this country last year. It was 323 the year before. We're not talking about pulling up the drawbridge and not letting anyone in. Right. I'm sure that number of skilled people can be incorporated into the amount of people that leave the country and then come back in.
But we cannot bring in 100,000 skills unless at least 100,000 other people are prepared to leave.
Yeah, but we're not in that situation, are we? Because there's over 300,000 people virtually every single year leaving this country. But look,
well, that's at the moment. You don't know what it will be like in the future, and your immigration policy will be determined by the number of people prepared to leave.
But in the meantime, what we need to do is to train our own people. We need to train our own nurses, our own doctors, our own teachers, and therefore you can reduce the amount of people that have to come into fill the skills gaps. Of course it takes time, but we're saying that this will work over a 5-year period.
But did you just pluck this policy out of thin air? Because even your own candidate in Derby North, he said the idea was, quote, stupid.
Well, we got this idea. I mean, the first people to put this forward was Frank Field from the Labour Party, Nicholas Soames from the Conservatives. They're talking about balanced migration here because we realise that somebody has to get a grip on the population, because otherwise we're going to be in a situation in the future where we'll have to have a huge school building programme. The NHS, which is fit to bursting at the moment, it will only be under more pressure. We'll end up with more motorways. We'll end up with a new rail network. It cannot continue. Capital spend will be massive unless we get control of population.
But as you will know, Derby North, your candidate who thinks the idea is stupid, of course, that's the home of Rolls-Royce, one of our great British companies. He says, I think it's not practical. I think Rolls-Royce would say it was stupid. And I would agree with them.
Well,
your own candidate.
Well, I don't see how anyone can think it's stupid because, as I say, what we will be bringing in is skilled migration, migrants who'll add to the economy, migrants who'll add to the tax receipts, and therefore it will be good news all round.
It just creates this general impression that in your desperation to be noticed in this election, and it's been a struggle for you, you're becoming ever more extreme. On immigration, you're now more hardline than Nigel Farage.
We've moved on from where we were at the last election. But you know, between 1970 and 1997, migration was running net roughly at around 20,000. So we weren't that far off balanced migration in those years anyway.
Let's move on to Brexit, a matter very important to UKIP. And the debates move now to the nature of the Brexit deal. Now, at some point, there'll need to be a deal done to give current EU residents continuing rights in the UK. In your view, how long will they have to have lived in the UK to be given those rights?
Well, look, I mean, we've made it perfectly clear in our general election manifesto that the 167,000 EU migrants who are working in the NHS can stay. Okay, no debate about that. But I think once Article 50 had been triggered, it's then up for negotiation with how long people can stay for.
So if you're an EU citizen and you've come in since the end of March when Article 50 was triggered, you won't necessarily have a right to remain.
No, well, that'll be down to the government of the day.
Well, I'm asking what your view is.
That'll be down to the government of the day to go into negotiation with the European Union, because what we've got to do is to ensure that the rights of British citizens in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, in Greece and everywhere else can stay as well. If they come to a satisfactory agreement whereby British citizens' rights are protected in those countries, then I'll have no problem whatsoever.
I understand that, but you mentioned only EU citizens working in the NHS. Is that it?
Yes, at the moment. We're going to make that point perfectly clear that they can...
So EU citizens who are teachers, university professors, lecturers, they may have to leave?
But these are people who've come before Article 50 was triggered. Those who've come after, and there won't be that many who've come after at this present moment of time, we'll just have to wait and see what the Prime Minister comes up with in terms of a negotiation.
Clarify this, Mr. Nuttall. Yep. Everybody who's here when Article 50 was triggered has indefinite right to remain.
Yes.
With all the same access to services, the NHS, in-work benefits and schools. But after Article 50, that's uncertain. If you've just arrived here from Germany or Italy or France, You're not quite sure?
That will all depend on the agreement that the Prime Minister can strike with the European Union.
Now, as we all know, the EU in various ways has been demanding billions of pounds, as people call it, a sort of divorce bill. Now, your manifesto says we shouldn't pay a penny. But if even a modest sum, not tens and tens of billions, but a modest sum secured substantial access for us and continuing access to the single market, you wouldn't pay it?
Well, I don't see why we should. Because since the early 1970s, when we've been members of this organisation, we've handed over £183 billion net to this organisation in membership fee alone. I don't see why we should have to pay a divorce bill on top of that. And look, the EU are just picking figures out of the air on this. You know, 50 billion, 100 billion 2 weeks later. Well, I don't see why we should. We've got 9 billion wrapped up in the European Investment Bank. Surely we must own part of EU buildings all over, real estate all over Europe.
But if we got to a situation where for a modest to governments, not modest to individuals, but modest to governments, 10, 12, 15 billion, and in return, we would have tariff-free access to the European Union and all the jobs that would guarantee and save. You wouldn't pay that?
Hang on. Do you know, we're going to get tariff-free access anyway. I'll tell you why.
You don't know that.
Well, look, do you know, the European Union might be a corrupt organisation, it might be a bullying organisation, but it isn't a stupid organisation. There are millions of jobs on the continent which are dependent on British trade. And we have a huge trading deficit with the European Union.
If you ask the Greeks if it's not a stupid organisation.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, they've had problems, of course, with the
It's a trade-off to continue with tariff-free access for several billion pounds.
Andrew,
that would be money well spent, would it
We are
not?
the 5th largest economy on the planet. Okay, we're Germany's biggest marketplace outside Germany. We're France's biggest marketplace outside France. In fact, we bought, for the French farmers, I mean, we bought 39 million bottles of champagne last year. The Germans sold 800,000 cars into our economy. There will be a trade deal. It's mutually beneficial.
I understand that's your argument, but it just seems to me to be for a relatively small amount of money, nothing like the 100 billion that's been floated, perhaps not even the 50 or the 60 billion, to secure us continuing largely as we are, which would be a huge triumph for Britain to have got that. You wouldn't pay a penny.
I don't see why we have to pay this organisation a single penny, considering, as I said, that we've paid in almost 200 billion in membership fee alone since we've been members since 1973. I think it's wrong.
All right. Now, major parties, they use their manifestos. They hope to set out a grand vision. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But your manifesto's got talk about scrapping VAT on fish and chips, tackling what you call the lad culture. We talked about banning the burqa, but it's interesting that in the manifesto you want to prevent it because it, quote, it prevents an intake of essential vitamin D from sunlight.
Oh, well, I mean, hang on.
These aren't quite serious, are they?
Well, that last point, you know, there is a myriad of research, by the way, medical research, which proves our point on this. However, that's peripheral to the burqa point.
I mean,
but hang on. I mean, the problem that we've got with the burqa and the niqab is that it prevents people from communicating. It prevents people from integrating into society. No, but this is a really serious point. And as I say, if you want to enjoy the full fruits of British society, you have to be able to show your face.
So why mention vitamin D and sunlight?
Well, because there's lots of research which proves our point on this.
Right. I mean, isn't the truth is that UKIP is becoming increasingly irrelevant? That the 2017 general election is the beginning of the end for UKIP, isn't it?
Well, look, do you know, sometimes in politics, the tide comes in, the tide goes out. And this is very opportune for Theresa May at the moment because she's able to talk the talk and act tough on the issue of Brexit because she hasn't gone into those negotiations. It will get difficult for her once the negotiations start. And that's why it's so important that UKIP remains on the pitch. And if she does backslide, I'll make a prediction. UKIP by the end of 2018 could be bigger than it ever has been before.
But the tide has gone up for UKIP and it's been shown you've got no clothes bar a particularly extremist set of garbs.
No, I don't buy that at all, actually. I think what our manifesto has been agenda setting. We're leading the agenda when it comes to integration. Obviously, the Conservative Party in some areas have stolen our clothes. But equally, as I say, UKIP's job is to set the agenda in politics, and we've been very successful at that in the past. Look, do you know when we spoke about Brexit 15 years ago, people looked at us as if we were lunatics. We've now got Brexit. When we spoke about grammar schools, people said that they were unfair, they were bad for the working class. It's now government policy. When we spoke about a point system for immigration, we were called racist and xenophobes. It's now government policy. I put it to you that many of the things which are in the UKIP manifesto this time round will be government policy, or at least the policies of the other parties within the next decade.
For the big picture, you're in an uncomfortable position because the truth is that for UKIP to succeed, Theresa May's Brexit has to fail.
No, because UKIP will move on and campaign on other issues which are contained within our manifesto. And I don't want Theresa May to fail.
But you just said she becomes relevant if she backslides.
Hang on. Yes, but look, you know, I will put country above party. I want Theresa May to succeed in these negotiations. That's if she's still the Prime Minister.
Of course.
But I want her to succeed in these negotiations. I wanted to do well. I wanted to get the best deal for Britain. Right. My problem is that if you look at her record as Home Secretary, I'm not sure she will get that best deal.
But if come the next election, whenever that is, we're out of the customs union, we're out of the single market, we're out of the European Court, we're also out of UKIP. There would be no purpose to you by then.
Oh no, there would, because we continue to set the agenda on integration. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of an English Parliament. We're talking about scrapping the House of Lords. There's lots of things for UKIP to continue to campaign on.
All right. Now, your period as leader hasn't been covered in glory, has it, Mr. Nuttall? You lost the Stoke Central by-election, even though it was a hugely pro-Brexit constituency. Number of claims that you made on the website during that campaign turned out to be untrue. You did badly in the local elections. During the ITV debate, you forgot the name of the Welsh National Party leader. You're not the man to save UKIP, Mr. Nuttall, are you?
Oh, well, hang on. Do you know, I was elected as leader of UKIP with the biggest mandate that anyone's ever received in a leadership election. Do you know, I took a flyer on Stoke. I took a gamble, and it didn't pay off.
No,
you know, sometimes you get, well, we halved Labour's majority in that election.
You crashed and burned.
But, you know, look, I would love to have been an MP. I would love to have won that seat. It didn't work. We knew that these local elections were going to be the hardest set of elections that we ever fought. As I say, sometimes in politics, the tide comes in, the tide goes out. It will come back in again.
But you know that what a lot of people say, including some critics in your own party, is that UKIP under Paul Nuttall is a pale imitation of Nigel Farage's UKIP.
Well, I think if you look at our manifesto, it's proof that it's not. UKIP has moved on, it's campaigning on other issues, and UKIP in the future will be relevant, if not more relevant, than it's ever been in the past.
We both know Nigel Farage, Mr. Nuttall.
Yes.
You're no Nigel Farage.
Well, do you know, I'm not Nigel Farage. Quite obviously, we come from completely different backgrounds. We have a completely different leadership style. I've only been the leader of UKIP for 6 months. I'm now in a general election. And I believe I'll lead UKIP after this general election and we can go on to great things.
Are you the last leader of UKIP?
No, absolutely not.
Who else would want it?
Well, you know, we've got some really good people coming through at the moment. And I think, you know, in the future, being the leader of UKIP is a 4-year term, we will go on and we will have another really good leader of UKIP. But as I say, UKIP's future is secure. UKIP will campaign on other issues in the future. But beyond that, if Theresa May backslides on Brexit, she must know that UKIP will be bigger and more important than it's ever been in the past.
Paul Nuttall, thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.